The text arrived 3 days before my birthday. Surprise party this Friday. Don't make plans. Dress nice. Love, Mom. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Part of me wanted to say no, to type out an excuse about work deadlines or a last-minute trip I'd forgotten to mention. The thought of skipping felt like relief for exactly 5 seconds, until I remembered what would follow. Declining wouldn't end with a quiet understanding. It never did with my family. The guilt would ripple for weeks. My sister would lace every future conversation with jokes that sounded like teasing, but felt like reminders. My mother would leave long, wandering voicemails about how I never let people celebrate me. The emotional tax was predictable, so I typed a single word. Okay. The venue wasn't terrible. One of those mid-range event halls with rented white tablecloths and artificial ivy garlands looped across plastic columns. There was a small stage near the front, just wide enough for a mic stand and a Bluetooth speaker setup. Metallic gold and blush pink balloons drifted lazily near the ceiling tiles. As soon as I walked in, I recognized most of the faces. Family, neighbors, a handful of family friends, a few coworkers I hadn't seen in years. Near the drink station, standing awkwardly beside the punch bowl, was Mark, my boss. I blinked. For a second, I wondered if I was imagining him. But there he was, casual in a blazer, holding a soda can like he wasn't entirely sure how he'd ended up here. We'd grown closer over the last year. Not in any way inappropriate, just through the steady rhythm of work. He'd mentored me through more than one professional crisis, encouraged me to apply for a promotion I had convinced myself I wasn't ready for, offered quiet support in the way people do when they recognize capacity you're still learning to claim. I had mentioned the party once, in passing, but I hadn't invited him. Apparently, my sister had taken that upon herself. She said it would mean a lot if I came, he said, handing me a soda from the cooler with a half shrug. And honestly, after hearing how hard you've worked this year, I figured you deserved at least one familiar face in the crowd. I smiled, small, grateful, already bracing myself for the evening ahead. If there was one thing I knew for sure, it was this. A room full of my family and a live microphone never ended gently. Dinner started easily enough, buffet style. Chicken marsala that had spent too long under the heat lamps. Overcooked pasta. A lonely tray of steamed vegetables that remained mostly untouched. People drifted between tables making small talk. Toasts were offered. Soft, harmless at first. My uncle congratulated me on the promotion, but followed it with a pointed joke about how I could finally afford to settle down. My cousin added that I should get frequent flyer miles for attending so many weddings and baby showers solo. Even my mother couldn't resist chiming in between bites of salad. We just want to see you happy, sweetie. You've got the career. Now it's time for everything else. I smiled when I was supposed to. Nodded at the right moments. Laughed on cue. Mark stayed mostly quiet, but I caught him watching the conversation unfold with that same expression he wore in budget meetings. Half observation, half silent calculation, like he could already see where the night was headed. After dessert, the room lights dimmed. My sister took the mic. Okay, everyone, it's time for the slideshow. There was cheering from the back, a few claps. Someone whistled loud enough to make my shoulders tense. I froze as she clicked the remote. The first few slides were innocent. Baby photos. Toddler milestones. A shot of me in oversized sunglasses making mud pies in the backyard. But it didn't stay that way. The next set rolled out with less care. Middle school. Braces. Bad haircuts. One Halloween costume that should have stayed buried in a photo album no one opened. Then came the captions. Queen of awkward phases. Miss Independent. Still. 40 and fabulous. And still single. The laughter grew louder with each slide. People leaned toward one another, grinning, nudging shoulders. Even the ones who hadn't seen me in years laughed like they had earned the right. I stayed seated. It wasn't because I wanted to, and it wasn't out of resignation either. Standing felt like too much effort, like announcing something I wasn't ready to explain. But walking out would have been worse. Too dramatic. Too easy for them to turn into another punchline later. Staying was the only choice that felt like mine. The room didn't stop. The laughter kept rising and falling in uneven waves, each new joke landing harder than the last. I could feel the tightness building in my throat, the tremor settling into my hands, that slow and familiar burn crawling up the back of my neck until it felt like every nerve ending had been set to fire. This wasn't embarrassment in passing. This was humiliation with weight, the kind that sits in your chest for days and only unpacks itself later, when no one else is watching. Still, I didn't stand. I didn't speak. I stayed seated, smiling the kind of smile that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with survival. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Mark's expression. His arms were crossed, shoulders squared, that same unmistakable stillness I'd seen in boardrooms just before he delivered bad news that no one else had the nerve to say out loud. When the final slide flickered and faded to black, the lights snapped back on. The room burst into applause like this had all been some great, harmless performance. And before anyone else could fill the air with one more joke, Mark stepped forward. The clapping hadn't even finished by the time he reached the front of the room. He didn't yank the microphone, didn't raise his voice. He simply took it from my sister's hand with the same calm, practiced authority I'd seen him use in staff meetings when someone needed to be reminded who was running the room. The noise stopped fast. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The room fell into a kind of stillness I hadn't expected. Mark waited, let the silence settle, gave it space like he was giving everyone a last chance to think better of themselves. Then he spoke, steady and deliberate. I've spent the last 2 years watching this woman lead rooms full of people who talk half as loud and deliver twice as much as anyone sitting here tonight. His tone stayed measured, but the edge underneath it was unmistakable. Chairs shifted. Forks paused midair. I saw my mother's smile falter near the buffet table. Mark continued without breaking rhythm. I've seen her put out fires no one else even saw coming. I've watched her carry projects that should have buried entire teams. I've watched her mentor people who didn't deserve her time, because she believed in giving them the benefit of the doubt, even when they hadn't earned it. He turned then. His gaze moved slowly across the room, like he wanted every person to feel it land. And after sitting through this, I can't help but wonder how much of that resilience she learned right here, with all of you. A few people laughed, nervous, thin, the kind of laughter people offer when they don't know where else to look. Someone coughed. My sister stood frozen, still holding the remote for the slideshow. Mark didn't slow down. If this was supposed to be funny, it isn't. It's lazy. It's mean. And honestly, he paused just long enough to let the next part hit. It says a lot more about this room than it does about her. Someone at the back tried to speak. Whether it was a defense or an apology, I couldn't tell. But Mark didn't give them room to finish. His voice cut clean through whatever they were about to say. You spent the night laughing at her, he said, voice low but sharp. But from where I'm standing, she's the only one in this room who isn't a joke. The weight of that sentence settled fast and hard. Mark didn't wait for anyone to recover. He handed the microphone, not back to my sister, but to the DJ standing near the soundboard. Then he crossed the room and stood beside me. When he spoke again, his voice softened just enough to belong only to me. Whenever you're ready. That was all he said. I stood without thinking too hard about it. My hands didn't shake this time. My steps didn't falter as we walked toward the exit together. The silence after Mark's words felt thick enough to drown in. For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. Then my sister laughed, sharp, dry, like a defensive cough dressed up as humor. Wow, she said, shaking her head. Guess we can't take a joke anymore. There were scattered chuckles, the kind that sound more like relief than actual laughter. My mother chimed in next, voice high and bright, like she was trying to smooth everything back into place. You know how we are. Always teasing. Always playful. It's part of the fun. Yeah, my brother added from across the room, raising his glass like we were still all in on the same joke. It's how we've always been. It's family. I stood there, hands cold, heart pounding, and for the first time in years, I didn't swallow it down. I turned toward my sister. It's not just a joke. It's never been just one joke. It's every joke. Every birthday. Every holiday. Every dinner where you made me the story everyone laughed at because you couldn't stand 5 minutes without being the center of attention. Her smile cracked. I shifted to my mother. And you? Calling it love doesn't make it less humiliating. You've been letting them do this for years. You've laughed along with them. You've watched me sit through it and never once asked if I was okay afterward. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. I didn't stop. I turned to my brother. You've never stood up for me. Not once. Just stood there piling on, adding your little digs because it was easier to stay on their side. Someone near the back tried to change the subject. Come on, it's a party. I cut them off without raising my voice. It was supposed to be mine. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was exposed. I felt my throat tighten, but not from tears. From the relief of saying it. Finally. Clearly. Then I took one last look around the room. At every face suddenly too still. Too guilty. Too small. I'm done making it easy for you. And with that, I turned, walked toward the door. And this time, no one tried to stop me. Mark fell into step beside me like he'd been waiting for the cue. I didn't turn around to see who watched us leave, but I felt the silence we left behind like something physical trailing at my back. The cold air outside hit like relief I hadn't realized I'd been holding out for. The tightness in my chest eased the second the door closed behind us, muting the party and everything still happening inside. The music, the leftover laughter, the low hum of conversation. It all stayed behind like static from a radio I no longer needed to tune into. Mark stayed at my side, matching my pace across the parking lot. One of his hands stayed tucked in his jacket pocket, the other holding his car keys like he already knew I wouldn't want to drive myself home. We made it halfway to the car before I stopped. I pressed both palms to my face, not to cry, because there wasn't enough room left for that, but just to breathe. Mark didn't rush me. He stood close, but not too close, letting the moment stretch the same way he did after hard meetings when neither of us knew what to say next. When I finally lowered my hands, he asked, "You okay?" I let out a short laugh, tired and dry, but honest enough to sound like me. Define okay. Mark nodded like that was an answer he could accept. "You want to go home?" he asked. "Or somewhere with bad coffee and decent pie?" The corner of my mouth lifted for the first time all night. The smile felt small, worn in, but real. "Home," I said. "For now." We walked the rest of the way without speaking, but the quiet between us didn't feel weighted or sharp. It stretched in a way that felt like breathing room, like a natural pause in a conversation where both people understand that more has been said in the silence than words could cover. As Mark pulled the car out of the parking lot, I glanced back once. Through the wide event hall windows, I caught one last glimpse of the party still in motion. People stood in small, awkward clusters, their laughter dimmer now, their attention turned away from the space where I'd been sitting just an hour earlier. I faced forward again, turning my eyes toward the road ahead. Leaving didn't feel like retreat or surrender. It felt like the kind of choice I should have made a long time ago. The next morning, my phone lit up with notifications, one after another. Texts from family members arrived first. Their tone wasn't apologetic, just defensive. Each message more like damage control than concern. You didn't have to make it a scene. It was just jokes. Lighten up. We were trying to celebrate you. I can't believe you let your boss embarrass us like that. You know Mark made it worse, right? I scrolled through them without replying. The familiar cycle was already starting. Deflection disguised as care. Guilt packaged in performative worry. None of it surprising. Mixed in with those messages were others, different in tone, different in weight. Friends I hadn't heard from in years sent short bursts of support. Co-workers messaged in half jokes and knowing sympathy. A colleague from another department wrote, "Tell Mark he's my hero." An old friend said, "Wish I'd stood up for you sooner." A former college roommate added, "That was legendary." And from my assistant, a single line that landed deeper than most. About time someone said it. By noon, A blurry phone video of Mark's speech had started making its way across social media. The footage wasn't perfect, but the audio was clear enough to catch every word. People latched onto the part where he called the jokes lazy, where he named the room's behavior for what it was. The clip didn't go viral in the global sense, but it traveled quickly through enough professional circles that the shift at work became noticeable. People from other departments found reasons to stop by my office. Some offered a brief smile. Others dropped casual compliments. A few left coffee on my desk with no explanation at all. One cup came with a sticky note attached. The handwriting was messy, but the words were unmistakable. For the only adult in the room. Late that night, my sister finally reached out. Her text arrived close to midnight. "If you want to talk, let me know." I didn't think it would go that far. I stared at the screen for longer than I wanted to admit. The part she called that far wasn't about the speech. It wasn't about Mark standing up. It wasn't even about me walking out. It was every dinner where the joke stayed just sharp enough to sting, but soft enough to deny later. It was every birthday where the punchlines landed heavier than the cake. It was every time I laughed along to keep the peace while letting another small piece of myself erode in the process. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel obligated to explain my silence. I didn't owe anyone an apology for choosing distance over performance. Not anymore. 2 weeks later, I hosted my own dinner. No balloons, no slideshow, no jokes designed to draw blood and call it humor. Just 6 people I actually wanted in the room. A few close friends, 2 coworkers, and Mark, seated at the far end of my dining table, laughing at something my assistant said about bad office coffee and worse clients. I spent the whole afternoon in the kitchen. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. There was something steadying about it, moving from counter to stove without an audience, without commentary, letting the music play low while the air filled with the scent of garlic and rosemary. Every choice felt like mine. Every flavor, every detail. I picked up flowers on my way home from the market. Bold colors, full stems, the kind my mother used to call too much for a small table. I bought them anyway, placed them right in the center, let them take up space. The playlist was deliberate too. No family favorites. No nostalgic ballads pulled from childhood road trips or Sunday morning routines. Just songs that made me feel anchored, present, here. When people arrived, they didn't come with expectations. They brought wine, a few store-bought desserts, and the kind of open, easy energy that doesn't ask for anything in return. The night unfolded without performance. Conversations moved in wide, unhurried circles, from office gossip to bad dating stories to half-serious plans about starting a book club just for the excuse to gather again. Mark settled in without effort. He didn't overstep, didn't hover, just existed in the room like someone who knew how to leave space without making it feel empty. Every now and then, I caught him glancing my way when someone complimented the food or thanked me for the invitation. He didn't say much about it, but I noticed. When dessert came out, my assistant stood first, glass in hand. "I'm terrible at speeches," she said, smiling toward the center of the table. "But I'm really good at noticing when someone deserves one." The laughter that followed was light and genuine, the kind that fills a room without taking it over. She turned to face me then. Her voice didn't waver. "So, happy birthday. Again. But more than that, thank you. For showing the rest of us what it looks like to survive a room that forgets how to treat you." For a second, the conversation paused. Not because the words weighed too much, but because they landed exactly where they needed to. Mark lifted his own glass next, clearing his throat just enough to gather the room's attention. "To the woman who keeps the rest of us standing," he said. "Happy birthday, again. On your terms this time." Glasses raised in quiet agreement. There was no forced cheer, no awkward clapping, just the soft, simple sound of glass meeting glass, and the kind of silence that feels like safety, not absence. I leaned back in my chair and let myself look around the table, at faces that felt like choice, not obligation, at people who hadn't come to laugh at me or mold me into something easier to digest. They came to sit, to eat, to stay present. For the first time in longer than I cared to measure, I felt what celebration was supposed to feel like. This wasn't performance. It wasn't a show. It was the kind of quiet, steady celebration that feels like being chosen, without needing to earn it.